Welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Bueno, and I'm so excited to be sharing today's interview with you. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. The NARM Training Institute has a very special announcement. We are offering the Level 2 NARM Therapist Training online for the very first time. For anyone who may have been waiting for NARM training to come to your city or country, the wait is over. You can join us online starting in January 2021 for this NARM therapist training for mental health professionals working with complex trauma. The trauma field is evolving so quickly. This online training is an exciting opportunity to receive advanced, specialized training in addressing attachment, relational, developmental, and cultural and intergenerational trauma. For more information and to register, please visit www.narmtraining.com/level2online. We look forward to you joining our growing international NARM community and are inspired to work with you to bring NARM to your clients and communities in order to transform trauma. Hello, thanks for joining us today. Today's guest is somebody who is special to my heart in particular. We will be speaking with Heidi Winn today. Heidi is a licensed mental health counselor who has a private practice in Fairfield, Iowa. She's worked in the mental health field for over 30 years and has incorporated modalities stemming from Jungian depth psychology, dialectic behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, and EMDR. Heidi is now a NARM therapist working to support clients with developmental and complex trauma to sit with and uncover barriers to their aliveness and truth. So now here's Heidi. Hello, Heidi. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's so lovely to have you. And I already told listeners in our intro that you're one of my dear friends in the Chicago cohort for the NARM training.
Yes, I was really grateful to have you as a buddy to sit next to and absorb this incredible information.
Yeah.
When we were training together.
Man, I miss in person right now.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
Oh, goodness. But anyway, all that aside, you know how we start these interviews is by asking what it is that you really want listeners to get out of our conversation today. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I've been thinking about this. And for me, what NARM has brought is a sense of hope, a sense of possibility that I don't have to be run by the insecurities and the habits and the reactivity, the reactions that I have with people that I don't feel good about.
Mm-hmm.
It has given me a pathway of how to reach myself and be in relationship with myself. And from that, my experience has been a feeling of more connectedness, a more ability to see things more clearly. And what I would really like the listeners to experience is a sense of the effulgence, the richness that I have had from this learning, this training, this deepening of my relationship with myself.
Effulgence is a new word for me.
Yeah, I love that word. It means, for me, it means really rich soil to grow from, a full bandwidth to experience something with all parts, nothing exiled, nothing needed to be cut off or sent away because it's not acceptable. Just a full embracing, like the deepest breath you could take and feel a sense of connection to it all. Yeah, the universe, oneness, and anything. That's what effulgence is for me.
And that sounds very NARMy, so it's perfect word.
Yes.
Well, let's dig into your work. So tell us more about who you are and the work that you do.
Well, I live in Fairfield, Iowa, which is a small rural town in southeast Iowa that is a spiritual community based on transcendental meditation. And I moved here at the offering of my brother, who was a long-term meditator, to put my kids in a little school, private school, where they teach them meditation and they teach them the practices of like outer's reflected on the inner, or just how to really connect inside with themselves. And I was at a job change. I was living in Portland, Maine, and it made sense to do it. So I took him up on his offer. I didn't know TM. I had never done it. And I had to learn it as a parent with kids in the school. One parent has to do it. And
Oh,
I was a
wow.
single parent. So we all three, me and my two then daughters at the time, learned TM on my birthday, which is tomorrow,
Aw.
12 years ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. And from there, I started a new life and started doing private practice. Before that, I had spent many years, probably 20 years in the field of mental health, but more in supervisory roles, team leader roles, directorships, that sort of thing, with people with severe and persistent mental illness. So I live here in Fairfield now. I'm married to my husband, and I have a private practice where right now it's online, but I have an office in town. And I work with mostly adults, but I have a few teenagers. I think everybody has a bit of trauma in their experience, but I work with people, not so much the severe and persistent mentally ill clients that I had worked with in my previous years, because in private practice, I don't have the support and the structure that makes it much more doable. So now my people are a little bit more on the worried well side, and that's just fine with me. I enjoy that. They're coming to therapy seeking to problem solve, and then they get me, which is much more than problem solving. It's more like signing up for university of themselves.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Well, one of the things I really wanted to dig into with you today is your connection to the transgender community, right? And how that intersects with not only your own personal trauma, but the trauma of clients that you're working with. Would you mind kind of sharing the beginning of that journey?
Yes, yes. So the journey for me with that started about 5 years ago when my then daughter started cutting. And it led to a year of suicide attempts, four of them in a row. And it was baffling to me why she wanted to die. And she curled up to me in bed and snuggled and said, "I just feel like I'm on a mission to die." And I was like, how can you say that? What is this? And after her fourth suicide attempt, she called me up from the hospital that she was in. She was in and out of the hospital for 3 months during that period of time. And she said, and I'm using she intentionally at that point because that's what she was to all of us. She said, "I had a moment of clarity last night. I'm a boy inside and I want to be called Finn." And I said, "Well, welcome, Finn. I'm glad you're clear." And that's how I felt. I mean, to be honest with you, Finn, he could have come out as a pineapple and I would have accepted it. I had been through so much and, whatever. And we had tried so hard to keep that child alive. We locked up this pills and the sharps, and we tried to do an in-home hospitalization and it was impossible. We just could not keep that kid from trying to harm himself until he came out. And at the hospital, they have these purple cards that they assess from 0 to 7 on suicidality. And every day that this kid had been in the hospital, they do it 3 times a day. It had been at a 6 or a 7 in terms of intentionality and thoughts.
Wow.
And the day that Finn came out to me, they dropped down to a 0, and they were like that every single day. So that was a big relief, and I would sneak my phone into the hospital, and we'd order boy clothes, and we got permission from my friend to come and give him a boy haircut, and we just started a journey. And his friends at school and the school itself were welcoming and thrilled. They were so scared and worried. So he stayed in the hospital for 3 more weeks, but we didn't feel like we could. I didn't know let me think how to say this, Sarah. I didn't know if it was temporary. I didn't know he would come home and try again. And so with coordination with the hospital, we decided that he would go to a long-term facility for 5 to 8 months where he could explore his identity and not have the influence, whatever influence I might have had, which I now understand as a NARM practitioner, what I was contributing to in terms of misattunement that I didn't know. Even though my heart was wanting to fully support him, I still had all my ways where my kids are an extension of my identity. And so when they do something, it's a reflection on me. So I would be trying to control what they were doing or how they were appearing to the world instead of really being with them. And I have to say that that was a bit devastating once I got to NARM and realized what I wasn't able to provide for my children at that time. And so fortunately with NARM, NARM allows one to start having compassion for who we are and where we were and what we did, and that we did the best. But anyway, back to Finn. So Finn went to a place and struggled, but explored his identity, and it stayed. We didn't know if it was just a, how do I say this, ploy or a strategy or anything. We didn't know. And I didn't know anything about transgender kids or the identity or anything like that. Eventually, maybe 4 or 5 months later, Finn said, I want to come home. I want to go to school. I want to learn everything there is to know. And he agreed. Anyway, he agreed to have the school have contact with his therapist and to be fully transparent. Finn came home and had a really great 8th grade year. He thrived. The school had been divided because that's how Maharishi in Transcendental Meditation had set up, kind of a Far Eastern way, which was boys' school and girls' school. So Finn went from the girls' school to the boys' school, wore a boy uniform, and was completely welcomed with open arms. And we started learning a lot about transgender parenting and identity. And I got on a Facebook group called Parenting Transgender Children, a private, safe Facebook group. So I learned a lot from other parents who were on various parts of the curve of like about binders, learned about where to get binders and what.
Can you describe to folks who might not know what that is?
Right. So Finn had a body dysphoria. He was a boy inside a girl's body. And at 14, he was developing breasts and had his period. And it made him feel really bad. The reminder that he didn't have control over his body and how it looked. So we had to look at safe ways to help him minimize the feminine aspects. And one of them was a lot of kids, if they don't have the support, will use ace bandages or duct tape, and wrap their breasts. And it can cut off circulation. It can cause a lot of problems to all those lymph nodes around there and the organs, the lung capacity. It can be very serious. And so there are binders, which are like a firm-fitting sports bra, jogging bra, that is a little bit longer than just a bra. It covers a little more area. And it's safe, although it's recommended not to wear it for longer than a certain number of hours, to take breaks from it. And there was a company that sent us one for free. It was his first one, sent us one for free. And between wearing boy clothes and in his uniform and having the binder and having his hair cut short, he really felt pretty much at ease, not completely because he still had body parts, but it wasn't a huge part of his pain around. So with some kids, it continues very severely to have the body's dysphoria. And it might have with Finn, he just didn't talk about it with me. So I don't know how much that was.
Right.
He struggled having his period at school using the boys' room. And then, where do you put your products? And his friends would help, and they'd, wrap and put it in the girls' room garbage. And he really had good support in a lot of ways. He still felt different, though. He still felt different because he wasn't a girlfriend anymore with his girl buddies.
Yeah.
And he didn't grow up in the rough and tumble identity with the boys. And so there was an awkwardness for him. He felt lonely. He felt very lonely. But he loved his teachers. He loved learning. He did have a period of time when I think he went back to cutting, and it was in his thighs, and it was pretty serious. So we had he was terrified that if the school found out that they would make him leave, so he didn't want to tell me. We supported him with that. We really rolled with him with his journey, and I learned how to follow the lead of this child and not to superimpose what I think, to offer, to ask. So I was learning some of the things that we're learning in NARM.
Right. Curiosity.
I was learning curiosity and how to support his truth as it was for him, not for how I thought it should be. So when school, we really thought that the roots took hold in this plant, that this kid was thriving. And school ended. I was very busy as a clinical director. So I had long hours, and it was kind of a confusing thing. He had state insurance because they sort of force you to when they're in this long-term facility. And then when he got discharged, he switched to my private health insurance. And the private insurance did not, it covered his what's called puberty blockers. Oh my God, I forgot the name of it. I think it's Lupron, which is something that stops puberty from developing. Now, even though Finn had already developed, it was an in-between before he started testosterone. And I will say that in the beginning, when Finn came out as a boy, I was getting a lot of flack from friends and people, and I was saying, oh, no, we're not doing anything until he's 18. No hormone treatment, nothing, like no way. And then as information came in, I saw how harmful that was. I saw, and I got feedback from other people both ways. Like, you're harming your child by considering putting him on hormone treatment, and or from others, you're harming your child by not. And
what a bind.
Yes, it was a bind, but I was more inclined to go as more information came in. And his doctor at the University of Iowa Medical Center said, let's do the hormone blockers for 6 months. And then in October, we'll start testosterone. Now, testosterone is not an expensive drug. It's maybe, I think I learned $50 a month. The Lupron was about $3,000 a month, but my private insurance brought it down to $1,700 a month for one shot. And so when he came out of the hospital, when he had his first shot of Lupron, he was still on state insurance. The second shot, he was on my insurance, and we used our savings to pay the $1,700. So come June of 2017, he had just finished his 8th grade year, and we didn't have the money to pay for the next shot. And we were asking AbbVie, which is the parent company to Lupron, asking for discounts, anything. We were Googling to try and get discounts. We were talking to the pharmacy companies. And we were talking to our state insurance, please, can you make an exception on this? And we kept getting denials. So we were up against this one particular day on the second insurance denial. And the day after I got, AbbVie had said, sorry, you're just slightly over income to qualify for our patient assistance program. So we sat at dinner that night and said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to find something else besides Lupron for this transition period. Or I don't even think I said transition. We're going to have to find something else, either maybe birth control that will stop your periods. And he said, but that'll make me fat. And he had, issues with his weight. He was quite thin at that time, but before that, he was a little bit of baby fat kind of a kid, not much. And I said, I'll call the doctor tomorrow. We'll find out something. And he said, can't you do a GoFundMe? Can't you do something to raise the money? He got desperate. And I said, I'm sorry, this is a small town. We've already done a GoFundMe when you were having so much difficulty to get you treatments, to get you support. I don't know that my friends, my Facebook group would support hormone treatment. You could do one. And I said, or, he had a little job at an organic health food store around the corner. I said, or your customers love you. You could put out something to ask for support. And he said, but this is for my happiness. And I said, I'm sorry, we will find a solution, but we can't afford your shot this month. And he got upset, and he went upstairs, and I didn't see him for the rest of the evening. The next day, my husband was flying out to France to visit our other daughter, who was in a foreign exchange program through, I've forgotten the name. Anyway, just a foreign exchange program. She was in France for her junior year of high school, and Jean was going to go over and meet her families and tour and see his family that live in Paris and the surrounding areas. So we got up the next morning, showered, meditated, started driving to Chicago to the airport and got a phone call. And it was from the medical examiner of this area. And he asked when we were coming home. And I said, not till midnight tonight. I won't be home. Why? What's going on? And he said, well, when's the last time you saw Emily? And I hadn't seen Emily in a year, right?
Right.
And I was like, Emily? And I'm thinking I'm the clinical director of a program. There must be a patient. And I was trying to think which client is named Emily. And he said, oh, this is awkward. When are you going to be home? And I said,
my God.
I said, I'm not coming home till tonight. Do you mean Finn? And he said, yes. And he said, what jewelry was, I think he said Emily again, dead named him. What jewelry was Emily wearing? And that made it real. This guy had Finn. And I said, I don't know. I described, something. And I said, either a black or a red chain. Jean has the one or the other. And they have similar necklaces. And he said, red. And then I remembered Finn's was red. And I said, yes. And I said, is he alive? And I said, you have to tell me. And he said, no. And he said, I said, where did you find him? And he said, by the railroad tracks. And I said, okay, we'll turn around now. And we did. We turned around and drove 2 hours back in shock. And when we got back, I ran upstairs and looked for a note. There was no note. His computer was open to a page that Ellen DeGeneres had done on amazing kids who've been bullied. And on his bed was a printout that a classmate had written about bullying. Now, I didn't know that Finn felt bullied, but I wondered, and I don't even know if that was left out intentionally or what his mindset was. His phone was charged in the charger. And from there, we had, you can imagine, the shock, the community rising, the journey that comes in learning that your 14-year-old transgender child who had depression and anxiety and pain, but we thought was thriving, had been, laid his body across the railroad tracks and didn't get up when the tracks came. So deep in my heart, even in the shock, my pull, my yearning was to connect with my child. I love Finn, not just loved.
Right.
And as the days went by and some of the immediate shock passed, I started I was clear in my mind that I didn't want to feel separate from him. And as I explored, I found that when I went into the story of my child is dead, I found suffering. When I went into the fear of I'll never be the same, he'll never be here, all of those things that are understandable that somebody does when they're in grief. And what have I done? What did I do? How did I miss the cue? I'm a therapist. How did I not know? Why didn't I check on him that night? I was trying to give him space and allow him to have his feelings.
Right.
And when I went there, I felt insufferable pain, and I went to a place that I couldn't get out of. But when I allowed myself to feel the love that I had for that child, dead or alive, and I felt the sharp prongs of intense grief and loss, that pain, when I felt that, I felt like it hurt, but I felt connected to him. And thus I felt connected to myself. And that started informing me. Instead of following my thoughts that said, if I start crying, I'll never stop. The fact is, I learned you do stop. Yeah. You get tired, you fall asleep. I fell asleep. I could only sustain so much of that, and I didn't deny myself any of it. And I had incredible support from my community and my family. And right now, having done a year training of NARM and now entering the NARM Master's program, I can see that I was in my adult consciousness that I was using agency to direct where I was putting my focus. And I would get snagged in self-blame, and that would lead me down to the child consciousness places where I became overwhelmed, in despair. But I was really afraid. I have to be honest. I was very afraid of going into that child consciousness place because I didn't want to get to a place where I would want to kill myself. And I would have loved to have been with Finn, but and I've been suicidal before. I know what that's like. I've been down that route, but I don't feel that way now. I really like being alive. I love my marriage. I love my home. I love my other daughter that's living. I love my stepsons. I love my job. I don't want to die. But I was afraid that I could convince myself of that. If I let myself go to that place of despair, that darkness, that loss of perspective. And the other thing that I learned in that journey was how alive the connection with my child who no longer had a body is. And so my view of death and separation from the 3D world that we live in began to change. I began to have more trust in a bigger picture, more capacity to sit with the mystery of not knowing instead of from the anxiety of trying to know and feel that I needed to know or be in control.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was very freeing and allowed me from that adult consciousness place, from that place of agency, to put words to how I felt, to bring the insight and articulate it. And that helped me. And it helped the people around me that I was sharing that with. And so they both fed on each other. I was providing a new way to look at this journey, and other people were benefiting from it as well and able to support me in that adult consciousness way. I stayed in that group of parenting. I still am in that group of parenting transgender children. I tried to get out of it because I thought I'm the poster child of the worst that can happen, that every single person in that group is afraid of. And here it happened. And I named that. I did. I even went to visit in Toronto. I visited the moderator, John Cross.
Wow.
And the feedback I got was, no, please stay. Please stay. You bring an important part. And we want to support you and we love you. So I'm less involved in active transgender life on a personal level in terms of advocacy. I certainly could have, but it was a little too much for me to stay in that advocacy. I think I needed some separation. I do have a dear friend, actually a couple of dear friends whose child has since come out as transgender and been able to support them, and have had some clients who also became transgender or were transgender when they came to see me. And I feel that I can bring a perspective and a heart with them of understanding and how not to try to direct what their truth is.
I cried through most of that. It's not lost on me how impactful hearing your story is going to be for listeners, I think, and the beauty and the grace in the intuitive wisdom that you had of knowing not to go into the story, right? And allowing yourself to access compassion. Were you working with a NARM therapist at that time?
No. In fact, the way that I landed, I know, the way that I landed in NARM was I worked for a year after Finn died. I don't know how I did it. I had a small caseload and I was the director of the mental health program of an agency, a fairly large agency. And a year after I went back to work, I hit the wall. I couldn't do it. And I went out on medical leave and eventually went on disability, on a private disability. And for that disability, I needed a licensed therapist. I'd been seeing somebody who, I really see her more as a spiritual counselor, and I value her, and she had done SEE, somatic experiencing. But for this insurance, I had to be in therapy weekly and it had to be by somebody who was licensed. And this person had kind of left the licensed world. She's 80 and she's so wise and awakened, but I couldn't use her for that. I still see her a couple times a month. But so somebody in my community had gone through the NARM training as a practitioner, a non-therapist practitioner, and posted on Facebook something about NARM. And I didn't know what NARM meant, but I did resonate with neuro, affective, and relational, which I think she must have spelled out in her Facebook post. And that was, months and months before. So I contacted her and I said, I'm kind of interested in this. And she said, oh, I think your case is too complicated for me, with what happened with your child, but let me refer you to my mentor. And she referred me to a woman in my town, a psychologist in town named Pamela Paradowski, who is a master NARM therapist. And I started seeing her, and she was licensed, so I could use that. And I had no idea what I was getting into. So I had, and it's now been 18 months since I've been working with her, and a little over a year since I have been in NARM training. And what it has done is, there's two things that are kind of interesting, because when I think back, I was like, Larry Heller, he's the founder of NARM, he didn't create healing developmental trauma. He uncovered it because I didn't know about it. Right. And here I was I had agency, I was doing it. And what I learned through the process of my NARM training is that he created a pathway. He put words to and named the journey, the pathway. He paved the pathway. Right. And for that, I'm so grateful, because not only having the NARM therapy for my own self, then having the ability to understand the underpinnings, the workings of it, and being able to articulate it. And the NARM training has really deepened my experience with, it's like loosening, like if there's really hard dirt and you can't get the plants out, the weeds out, it's like the NARM training just loosened and moistened so that those weeds could come out and I could get underneath.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
I thought those weeds were fixed. I thought the ways my sensitivity and I called myself oversensitive, my reactivity, my insecurity, all these things that I now know are adaptive strategies in child consciousness, I thought they were fixed. And what I learned and directly embodied in an embodied way experienced was a loosening. And then it's not that I pulled them out, it's that it began to loosen and they began to dissolve. And I also learned from this journey is that it's an ongoing process. There's never going to be something that isn't there. I'm not trying to exile my adaptive strategies. They served me well. It's just having an awareness, having a perspective about them and having a choice about whether I'm going to use that. Like, I'm a real charmer. And if I can really, I can work a room. And I went through some shame about that. Like, oh, I'm just using my strategy. I'm just wanting people to love me and adore me, and it's never going to be enough. So that capacity to not use that and to be, like just really more authentic instead of trying to get people to like me. Sometimes it can be very helpful in a situation to have that card to play. So I don't want to cut it out. I just want to be connected to myself with it, and to be able to be compassionate towards myself when I am disconnected or when I run amok with them, because it happens. And then I come back, go away, and I come back. So for those things, I feel very grateful. And that's the hope that I was telling you about in the initial that I wanted listeners to have, is to experience that feeling of hope, that those things, that's not hard-packed ground that can never be tilled. It's really, it's effulgent, it's rich. It all, it's like how in Findhorn, Scotland, they had really gravelly, sandy soil, but they ended up growing these incredible, huge plants. And there was they were bringing in some other energies in that. I won't go off. It's a very deep and a profound thing to look up and explore, the plants and fruits that they grew in Finhorn on this really rocky coast, and how incredible it was that they could grow these plants. I feel like there's a little bit of that. There's a mystery energy with NARM that by tolerating, in a lot of therapies, they try to simplify and make it as simple as possible so you can change. But what I'm really learning with NARM is that it doesn't want to cull it to simplicity.
Right.
It's trying to
because humans are not simple.
Right. It's trying to hold the complexity.
Right.
Hold both and sit with that and tolerate the distress of the both, and then find out what comes up from that.
Right.
What does somebody's own awareness and connection with their feelings and their thoughts and their body sensations arises from that? And that the human soul is so wise that something is going to arise if given the space. So it's been a really good model for me, both personally, especially personally, I will say, but as a therapist. And I have to say that I'm still learning NARM, we won. And I
You and me
feel,
both.
yeah, I feel quite emotionally uncoordinated when I'm attempting to apply a new technique. Not that NARM is a technique, but I feel emotionally uncoordinated. And as I sit even with that, something else happens. Something else happens when I tolerate the pressure, and I see the pressure I put on myself, and then I'm tuning into my client and I imagine what pressure they're putting on themselves. And I can sometimes go to this place, I call it my sacred listening space, that I can really hold space. And it's because I've been able to do that with myself, that I can hold that space for my clients. I can't always do it. Sometimes I take off thinking I need to have the answers. But NARM has really helped me grow that awareness of how to be with myself in order to be with my clients and with my daughter and my husband. I have to say, back to Finn for a second, that Finn's death has really, or Finn's journey, not just his death, because he's still alive for me, very much alive, but has really impacted how I parent my 20-year-old daughter. I really let go of thinking I knew what her truth was, or I knew what her college choices or majors or relationships needed to be, or whether or not she was going to overdraw her bank account. Like, there were some learnings I could offer if she wanted them, but it was really, she stopped becoming an extension of my identity. And I started allowing her to be her own person in my own mind. I mean, I don't know what she saw, but so that's been really helpful on that personal level. And my husband has recently signed up and is in the NARM online training. And I'm really thrilled. He's had so many awakenings and growth. He's quick, he gets it, and he's deepening his experience. Sometimes we have to be careful because, if he says, "Is that your child's strategy operating?" I can get kind of pissed. And so we have to kind of call a moratorium.
Child consciousness much?
Is that a strategy?
Oh my God. That's funny because my husband will be doing the NARM therapist training next year. So I'm just curious how we're going to use it against each other too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. It's like, can you use some agency here when I'm eating the cookie? Like, no.
Right.
Back off.
This cookie is telling me to eat it. Oh my gosh.
But it's given us a common language to deepen our relationship and to have even more intimacy. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I'm curious, and you've already talked a little bit about this, but I want to ask more pointedly, really, how NARM has informed really the way that you're working with clients, like what has changed for you, and specifically related to, I know you said you work with parents of transgendered children from time to time. How has NARM informed that work?
Oh, I also sometimes work with transgender clients, and I actually do have somebody who is going from into the non-binary range. So I have clients there too. So how it has shifted how I work with people is I don't see them as pathological. I don't see them as, I guess that's the right way to say it. Let me think how to say this. It's clear to me how their misattuned, their experience of being misattuned created kind of a false self, or Narm never uses that word, so forgive me for that.
She just did the sign of the cross. I just had to tell listeners that's really funny to me.
Just how these strategies that get developed turn into an identity, or what people think of as an identity, rather than as a strategy to keep themselves safe and to keep themselves protected from feeling the more primary emotions, the deeper feelings. And having that understanding, along with having my own capacity broadening and deepening to be able to sit with my own feelings and not try and do something about it, has allowed me to help to be with them in that way, to truly create a sacred listening instead of an informing. And I catch myself going into describing processes instead of just letting them experience processes. And that's part of my learning and my journey. But as I am able to do it for myself, I can't take them any deeper than I've gone myself, but I've gone pretty deep. And so I am able to hold a different space for them and trust their journey, trust when they disconnect that that's what they need. It's going to happen. That's what they need to do. And to really respect the strategies, the defense mechanisms, whatever you want to call them. And I will often say, we never take down a wall that we don't understand what it's holding up. And that it's really served like a bodyguard. It might be time to retire, but it has served them well. And to explore that, to appreciate it, to appreciate the strategy, even if it was a self-destructive one. Like I have one client who has some compulsive eating issues, and she said, I don't want to do this. And we really just explored what it would be like to appreciate how that has kept her safe, how that served her, how that she chose that instead of breaking her 30-year sobriety. And I think that can lead to a deeper appreciation of all the different ways that we go away from ourselves.
Absolutely.
And that we leave ourselves, or that we try and cover up. And I want to come back to, once I learned that feeling those feelings and how sharp the pain of grief over my 14-year-old transgender son's suicide left me, but how once I leaned into them, it's sharp, but then there's a release. And that experience actually became a portal of awakening for me. It's leaning into those core feelings opens to a whole nother side of, not just side, realm even, of experiencing life and how one looks at life. Now, I have work to do, because I think one of my primary emotions is anger, and I haven't really found that one with myself. I haven't fully gotten that one in, but that's okay. It will come as I'm ready. I'm not going to push the river. That's the other thing that I've learned, is that I don't have to be a completed picture. I'll never be one, but I put pressure on myself to be that sort of emotional and spiritual perfectionism. And it's not ever going to happen. I'll never be that. And whatever that is an image that I've been trying to manage. And that's a strategy, instead of coming back to being authentic and real and kind to myself. So all of those things are infusing into my therapy sessions with clients. And to answer your question more about the transgender parents and or transgender persons, I think that I just really am capable of being in the not knowing of what their truth is, and having it's an easier realm for me to be in stay in curiosity and not to fix anything, because it's really like a lotus flower of 1,000 petals unfolding. There are many facets and many aspects to one's identity with that. And the binary is one of them. It's one of them, but it's not all. Recently I had a session with a client, a 15-year-old who was telling me about her kids at school and how some of them are really weird. And I'm like, well, tell me what weird is.
Yeah.
And they're like, what's your version of weird? And she said, well, some of them are furries. And I said, what's a furry? And she said, well, you know how there's transgender or cisgender, or there's people in the binary. Well, there's people who have an identity that is an animal. And so it's like a transhuman or trans animal. I don't know. She just called them furries. And they dress like, one of them has one of a fox and dresses, with a fox tail and fox ears and sometimes is on all fours. Well, that blew me away. That was a new one for me. I don't know how I missed it, but I did
I was gonna
not.
say that's been around for a while.
I did not. I missed it.
Need to hang out with the kink community a little more.
Yeah. You're right. I thought I was pretty seeing a lot, but I did not know about that one. So it was like, okay. Now she wasn't telling me that she was that way, so we didn't need to explore it with her, except that it was weird and she didn't want to be identified with that. But the curiosity is easier for me to stay in the not knowing, to stay in the mystery of what their truth is. And actually, I really love, I have one client who hasn't come out yet as a transgender. And yet that person and I both know that she is, and it will be their own journey. They haven't identified pronouns that are different from their assigned gender. And I adore this person's journey. And it has its own time frame, its own unfolding. This person's in college and for the first time is away from home and is finding out little bit by little bit, and is finding out how their anxiety is lessening as they become more aligned with the truth of their gender identity. And I feel so honored to support that person and all of them in that journey. It's a really beautiful thing.
Well, the experience of becoming fully oneself, regardless of whether that's related to gender or sexuality or whatever aspect of life. I mean, that we know as therapists, I remember when I was not a therapist and my therapist saying to me, it's an honor to work with you, and thinking what? And I couldn't really comprehend what that meant. But now as a therapist, I really, truly understand it's a spiritual experience to sit with somebody who is becoming fully themselves. And I really hear you describing that in your work with clients.
Yes. Oh my God. It's so beautiful to hold that space and to be able to, I have a family that I see, and I see the mother and I see the kids, the teenagers, and one of the 15-year-old has recently come out as gender fluid. And so to be able to support the mother individually is really, it's easy for me with the kid. We just go with where they are. But the mother who's like, what the heck? Just to be able to sit with her. I don't do just NARM. I do some coaching about what it's like to be a mother, and that what it's like to be a kid and what cannot feel good. So I do some psychoeducation types of things with the mother about what isn't helpful and what is, and how to be curious. And then we also do some more, I would say, NARM work by just sitting with what that's like for her to be in this and to grieve. I thought this is not the baby girl this is not what I ordered. And to sit with what is that like? I understand that. I understand that so well. I did not order, even though I had, it was a beautiful thing when Finn came out as transgender. It's not what I ordered. It's not what I thought the picture was going to be. I thought, and Finn wasn't Finn's picture for a long time. He would say, I'm going to have kids. You're going to take care of my kids. And I'm going to build a house for you. And I didn't picture the way it came out.
Right.
And then I didn't order a child that didn't have a body, but it's what I got. And it was the gift. And so being able to explore with her that even though, like there's that saying, experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. So, or you didn't get what you thought you wanted. It's really, again, sitting back with the not knowing. I thought I knew this is what I wanted, and this is what life is showing up with me. How am I with that? What does that bring up?
Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of our time. Of course, I could talk to you forever and probably call you later. But is there anything that, in terms of the interview, that we didn't talk about today that you really want to make sure you leave the listeners with?
I feel that NARM is helping to facilitate healing to the world, that helping people come home to themselves and helping them separate out the trying to manage their image that is so culturally supported, and doing so through all of these strategies that keep one thinking that they're staying safe. And learning that the real safety is in the incredible essence of that authentic self, of that adult consciousness, that whole self. And living there is how the world is going to shift from the mess that it's in now. So it's healing people one person at a time as we're healing ourselves. And when I say healing, I don't mean that we're doing something. It's really holding, again, like that sacred space, holding space for what's really there and sitting with it, that complexity. That is it's not a fixer thing, but it's sitting with what is and seeing what arises. That's going to be what changes us eventually politically. It's going to change physical health and emotional health, is that type of attunement.
I agree. Well, thank you, Heidi, for being here. Do you want to share with folks how they can find you if they want to learn more about you?
Sure. My email address is HeidiWinnLMHC@gmail.com. That's HeidiWinnLMHC@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be on this podcast with you, and I feel very honored to be asked to be interviewed. And I feel very grateful for Larry for uncovering NARM, and for Brad and Stephanie and Marcia and all of the people who are guiding us. It's really very powerful, and I feel very loved, and I feel capable of loving myself in a different way. So
That's a beautiful way to end. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can check out the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The NARM Training Institute has a very special announcement. We are offering the Level 2 NARM Therapist Training online for the very first time. The trauma field is evolving so quickly. Trauma-informed therapists who want to learn how to address the long-term impacts of adverse childhood experiences and complex post-traumatic stress disorder want to be trained in NARM, one of the first clinical models specifically designed to address ACEs and CPTSD. This online NARM therapist training is starting in January 2021 and is filling up fast. So if you're interested, we'd encourage you to register now to reserve your spot. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/level2online. That's www.narmtraining.com/LEVEL2ONLINE. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We really look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.